There are species in the universe that have existed for millions of years. Beings who have watched stars collapse into themselves and be reborn. Civilizations that have conquered death itself, achieving something humans dream about in every religion, every whispered prayer, every desperate bargain made in hospital waiting rooms. And yet, they envy us. They envy us not for our technology, which is primitive by cosmic standards. Not for our bodies, which are fragile and temporary. Not for our achievements, which barely register on the scale of galactic time. They envy us for something we consider our greatest curse, our deepest limitation, the source of our most primal terror. They envy us because we die. How can mortality, the one thing humans fear most, be the one thing immortal beings wish they possessed? How can the ending we spend our entire lives running from be the very thing that gives life meaning? Dr. Robert Chen, 61 years old, astrophysicist at Stanford, recently widowed, was about to discover the answer. Not through his telescope, not through his equations, but through a conversation with a being who had lived for 4,000 Earth years and couldn't understand why Robert's wife's death made him love her more, not less. What you're about to hear isn't about aliens teaching humans how to transcend death. It's about humans teaching aliens why death makes us human. And if you're ready to understand not just what makes us mortal, but what makes our mortality sacred, subscribe to this channel now and turn on notifications. Because what's revealed here will change how you see every single day you have left. Robert Chen had been staring at the same grant proposal for 3 hours. The words blurred together, meaningless symbols on a screen that demanded he care about funding cycles and peer review when all he could think about was the empty chair across from his desk. Elena's chair. She used to sit there in the evenings, reading her novels while he worked on equations. Her presence a quiet comfort he'd taken for granted for 34 years. Until 8 months ago when she collapsed in the kitchen at 3:47 p.m. A brain aneurysm that took her so fast the paramedics said she probably didn't even feel pain. Just there, laughing at something on her phone, and then not there. Just gone. Just a body on the floor that looked like Elena but wasn't Elena anymore because whatever made her Elena, whatever animated those eyes and created that specific laugh, had vanished between one heartbeat and the next. He was a scientist. He knew what death was. Cessation of brain activity, cellular decay, the irreversible breakdown of biological systems. Consciousness was an emergent property of neural networks. When the network stopped firing, consciousness stopped existing. Simple. Final. No afterlife, no soul, no reunion in some imaginary heaven. She was gone. And knowing that, understanding it completely, made absolutely no difference to the hole in his chest that refused to close. The house felt wrong now. Everything in the wrong place even though nothing had moved. Her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet. The one with the chipped handle she'd refused to throw away. Her gardening gloves on the shelf in the garage, dirt still caked in the creases. Her handwriting on the grocery list still magnetized to the refrigerator. Tomatoes, basil, that good bread from the farmer's market. Robert couldn't bring himself to erase it. Couldn't throw away the gloves. Couldn't donate the mug. These objects had touched her hands. They were the last physical evidence that she had existed, had moved through this space, had been real. His colleagues at Stanford had been supportive initially. Cards, casseroles, awkward condolences in hallways. But 8 months in, the patience was wearing thin. You should be moving forward, Robert. Elena wouldn't want you stuck like this. They meant well. They also had no idea what they were talking about. What made it worse, what made no logical sense at all, was what he'd been doing since she died. He was finishing her projects. The garden she'd started in the backyard, he was completing it. Planting the jasmine she'd ordered but never got to put in the ground. Why? She'd never see it bloom. He was organizing her recipes into a book, even though she'd never cook from it. He was donating monthly to the music education charity she'd cared about. Money that would fund programs she'd never witness. And most strange of all, he was writing to her. A journal, every night, telling her about his day. Elena, the maple tree you planted is turning red earlier this year. Elena, I finally fixed the back gate like you asked. Elena, I miss you in ways I don't have words for. Writing to someone who would never read the words. For what purpose? For whom? His daughter Sarah had visited last weekend, concern etched in her face. Dad, you're talking to her like she's still here. You set 2 places at the table. You bought her favorite wine. This isn't healthy grieving, this is. She trailed off, unable to name what it was. Robert had wanted to explain. Wanted to say that he wasn't in denial. He knew Elena was dead. Knew she wasn't coming back. But he was doing something else. Something that felt important even if he couldn't articulate why. He was making her absence mean something. Making her life continue to matter even though she no longer existed to know it mattered. But how do you explain that to someone who hasn't felt it? How do you describe the urgent need to honor a presence through its absence? His children thought he was handling it poorly. Dad, maybe you should see someone. A therapist. This isn't healthy. But how could he explain that he wasn't clinging to the past? He was doing something else. Something he didn't understand himself. He was making her death teach him something. Making the loss transform him rather than destroy him. And he was failing. Because 8 months in, he still couldn't see the lesson. Still couldn't find the meaning. Still woke up every morning to the same crushing awareness. She's gone. And nothing I do will bring her back. And everything I build will also disappear. And everyone I love will also die. And in the end, silence. Friday night, October 13th, 2025. Robert sat on the back deck with a glass of Elena's favorite wine. Pinot Noir from a vineyard in Sonoma they'd visited on their 30th anniversary. He didn't drink it. Just held it, watching the way the porch light caught the dark red. The same color it had been that night when she'd laughed at his terrible pronunciation of the vineyard's name. The Stanford campus was quiet in the distance. A few lights in laboratories where graduate students were working late, chasing answers to questions they believed mattered. Robert stared up at the stars, hazy through the light pollution but still visible if you knew where to look. Orion rising in the east. Cassiopeia overhead. The same stars that had been there the night Elena died. The same stars that would be there long after he died too. And he asked a question out loud, to no one, to the universe, to the silence that never answered back. If nothing we do outlasts us, if everyone we love disappears, if every moment leads to the same silence, then why does it feel like what I'm doing still matters? Why does finishing her garden feel important when she's not here to see it? What's the point of any of this? His voice cracked on the last word. Tears he'd been holding back all day finally spilling over. What's the point of loving if loving leads to this? What's the point of building if everything crumbles? What's the point of living if living ends? And that's when the temperature dropped. Not gradually. Instantly. As if someone had opened a door to absolute zero. The sound of distant traffic on El Camino Real vanished mid-noise. The rustle of wind in the oak trees stopped. The air became unnaturally, impossibly still. Robert set down the wine glass carefully, his scientific mind trying to catalogue what was happening. Localized pressure anomaly? Impossible. Auditory hallucination from grief? Maybe. But the glass in his hand was shaking, rattling against the wooden armrest. And that was physical, measurable, real. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. That ancient animal response to presence, to being watched, to not being alone when you thought you were. And then he saw it. Not a ship descending from the sky. Not a bright light or a portal. Just a figure materializing on his deck 3 meters away, as if walking through a door that didn't exist. Tall, approximately 2.3 meters, humanoid in basic structure but distinctly, undeniably not human. Skin that seemed to emit a faint bioluminescence, silver gray in the porch light. Eyes that were too large, too dark, and too knowing. No pupils he could discern, just depth, like looking into wells that went down forever. The being's form was lean, almost fragile-looking, but Robert sensed this was deceptive. There was a quality to its stillness that suggested immense control, like a coiled spring or a held breath. Its hands, if they could be called that, had 6 fingers each, long and delicate. Robert's first thought was remarkably calm, all things considered. So this is a psychotic break. Grief-induced hallucination. I should call my doctor. But his hand didn't reach for his phone. His body remained perfectly still, that deep animal brain recognizing something profound was happening even if the rational brain refused to accept it. "You're real," Robert said. Not a question. A statement requiring confirmation. And then a voice that wasn't a voice. Words that didn't pass through the air but appeared directly in his mind. Fully formed, impossible to ignore. Clear as his own thoughts but distinctly not his own thoughts. A presence in his consciousness that shouldn't be possible. As real as your grief, Dr. Chen. As real as the question you just asked the stars. And I came because you asked the right question. The one my species has been trying to answer for millennia. Robert stood up slowly, the wine glass forgotten. His legs felt unsteady but he forced himself upright. Hallucination, he said out loud, testing the word. Neural misfiring. Isolation-induced psychosis. Grief manifesting as sensory distortion. You're wearing Elena's watch, the telepathic voice continued, calm and patient. You've worn it every day since she died even though it's too small and cuts off circulation to your wrist. You haven't adjusted the time. It's still set to 3:47 p.m., the moment she collapsed. No one knows this. Not your children. Not your colleagues. You haven't mentioned it to anyone. Only you. And now me. Robert looked down at his wrist, at the delicate silver watch that had been Elena's grandmother's, passed down through 3 generations. The hands frozen at 3:47. The second hand motionless. Time stopped at the moment she stopped. How could a hallucination know this? How could his own mind produce information he hadn't consciously acknowledged? He'd been wearing the watch without thinking about it. An automatic gesture every morning. But he'd never articulated why he kept it at 3:47. What are you? Robert asked, his voice steadier than he felt. An observer, the being replied, moving slightly, a fluid motion that looked almost like water flowing. A student of consciousness. I've been watching your species for 4,000 of your years, trying to understand something we cannot comprehend. And you, Dr. Chen, you're demonstrating it perfectly right now. Demonstrating what? How humans live beautifully while knowing they'll die. How you create meaning from limitation. How you love deeply despite inevitable loss. We've studied your biology, your psychology, your civilizations. We've analyzed your art, your philosophy, your religions. We've observed your wars, your peace, your creation, your destruction. And after 4,000 years, we still don't understand. We can't comprehend it. It's the one trait we cannot replicate, cannot explain, cannot even properly perceive. Robert felt something shift in his chest. Fear dissolving into something else. Curiosity. The same curiosity that had driven him into astrophysics at age 19. The need to understand what seemed incomprehensible. The pull toward mystery that had shaped his entire career. You're asking me to explain mortality to you? An immortal being wants a mortal to explain death. Not just mortality, the being said, moving closer with fluid, almost liquid grace. We understand biological death. Cellular termination. We've observed it across thousands of species on hundreds of worlds. Death is simple. Organic machines cease functioning. What we don't understand is how you make it matter. How you transform limitation into significance. How you live as if death gives life meaning rather than removing it. The being paused, and Robert sensed it was choosing its next words carefully, translating concepts that might not have direct equivalents. You're conscious beings who know you'll die, and yet you live as if your actions have eternal importance. You build cathedrals you'll never see completed. You plant forests you'll never walk through mature. You write books for readers not yet born. You sacrifice your present for futures you won't experience. This paradox, this impossible contradiction between knowing you're temporary and behaving as if you're eternal, this is what we've been studying. And we still don't understand. How long have you lived? Robert asked, the scientist in him demanding data, context, framework. 4,217 of your years, the being replied without hesitation. I was present when your species built the first pyramids at Giza. I watched the library of Alexandria burn, all that knowledge turning to ash. I observed your industrial revolution, the transformation of agrarian societies into mechanized civilizations. I witnessed your first atomic detonation at Trinity, the moment your species achieved the capacity for self-annihilation. I've seen empires rise and collapse into dust. Watched languages born and die. Observed technologies develop and become obsolete. The being moved to the edge of the deck railing, looking out at the lights of Palo Alto spreading below. And in all that time, in 4,217 years of existence, I've never once felt what you felt 8 months ago when Elena died. I've observed it thousands of times. Watched humans grieve. Studied the neurology of loss. Analyzed the psychology of bereavement. But I've never felt it. Never experienced the internal reality of it. Pain? Grief. Urgency, the being said, and the word carried a weight that made Robert's breath catch. Significance. The crystallization of time that makes every moment matter specifically because it won't last forever. When Elena died, something extraordinary happened in your consciousness. You didn't just mourn her absence. You suddenly saw, with devastating clarity, that every moment you'd shared with her mattered because it couldn't last forever. The finitude created the meaning. This is what we cannot feel. Before we continue, if you're beginning to recognize that what you've been taught to fear, mortality itself, might actually be what makes you human, what gives your life significance, the ebook Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence explores this profound truth. Not death as ending, but mortality as the context for meaning. The link is in the first pinned comment below this video. The being gestured toward one of the deck chairs with those long, six-fingered hands. May I show you something? Not with words, but with direct experience. I want you to feel what immortality feels like. Not as concept, but as lived reality. With your permission. Robert hesitated. Every rational instinct screamed this was impossible, dangerous, insane. But underneath the fear was that old familiar pull. The scientists need to know. The researchers' hunger for data. The human capacity to choose curiosity over safety. Will it hurt? Robert asked. No. But it might disturb you. The contrast between what you expect and what you experience can be unsettling. Robert nodded slowly and sat back down. The being remained standing, those impossibly dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that felt like being seen all the way through, past skin and bone and thought to something deeper. Close your eyes, the being instructed. I'm going to adjust your perception temporarily. You'll experience what we experience. What it feels like to exist without the deadline pressure of mortality. This will last approximately 90 seconds in your time perception, though objectively only 20 seconds will pass. Are you ready? Robert closed his eyes. His breathing slowed automatically, a meditation technique Elena had taught him years ago when his research stress had triggered chronic insomnia. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. Center, ground, prepare. And then everything shifted. It wasn't visual. It was deeper than that. It was a fundamental change in how time felt, how existence felt, how the universe pressed against consciousness. Robert became aware of infinite space stretching ahead. Unlimited tomorrows. Endless tomorrows. Tomorrows beyond tomorrows beyond tomorrows. A conversation he wanted to have with Sarah? It could happen now. Or next month. Or in 50 years. What difference did it make? No urgency. No pressure. Always later. Always another chance. A sunrise appeared in his awareness. Beautiful. Certainly. Objectively stunning. Colors bleeding across the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. But not precious. Not special. Because there would be another tomorrow. And another after that. And another. Infinite sunrises stretching into infinite futures. This one didn't matter particularly. They all blurred together into wallpaper, background, scenery without significance. The book he'd been meaning to write for decades, the one that would make astrophysics accessible to non-scientists, the one Elena had encouraged him to start? Why rush? Unlimited time meant unlimited procrastination. There was always tomorrow to begin. Always next year. Always eventually. And eventually, when you're immortal means never, because there's no deadline creating pressure to start. And relationships. Oh God, the relationships. He thought of his daughter Sarah, felt a faint affection, like remembering someone from long ago. But without urgency, without need, without the pull to connect deeply now. Why deepen the connection today? Why forgive old grievances when there's infinite time to repair things eventually? Why say I love you when there's always tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow? Why commit deeply to anyone when there's infinite time to find better matches, to explore all possibilities, to never settle for imperfect when perfect might be waiting in century 50 or century 100? And then Elena's face appeared in his mind, but it was different. Flat. Neutral. Just another person who had existed, one of billions he'd encountered across millennia. One consciousness among infinite consciousnesses. Why would this one matter more than others? Why would her absence create a hole when infinite time could fill any hole with infinite new experiences? She was just data. A memory file. Easily replaceable with new data, new memories, new faces that would also eventually blur into the infinite catalogue of beings encountered across forever. Robert felt himself reaching for her, trying to feel the love, the grief, the significance. But it was gone. Evaporated. Meaningless. She was a person who had existed. Now she didn't. What difference did it make when existence itself stretched infinitely forward and infinitely backward? Everything became nothing when nothing ended. And the horror, the creeping existential horror, was that this felt empty. Profoundly, devastatingly empty. Not peace. Not freedom. Void. Existence without meaning. Time without significance. Life without life. Robert's eyes snapped open, and he was gasping, actually gasping for air like he'd been drowning, like he'd been buried alive and just clawed his way to the surface. His hands gripped the armrests so hard his knuckles went white. Tears streamed down his face. No. No. That was horrible. That wasn't peace. That was emptiness. That was void. That was nothing. That was worse than death. That was death, just spread across forever instead of concentrated in a moment. That's immortality, Dr. Chen. The being said quietly, something like sadness coloring the telepathic impression for the first time. Infinite time makes everything optional. Nothing matters because nothing ends. We don't feel urgency because we have no deadline. We don't form deep attachments because everyone is replaceable across infinite time. We don't create with passion because there's no pressure to create now rather than later. Your philosophers speak of creating meaning. But they don't understand that meaning is impossible without scarcity. Your mortality isn't your curse. It's your gift. The deadline is what makes the game matter. Robert was trembling, his whole body shaking with the aftershock of that experience. But humans are terrified of death. We spend billions trying to extend life. We create religions promising immortality. We build cryogenic facilities to freeze bodies. We research telomere extension and cellular regeneration. We're obsessed with defeating death. Obsessed. Exactly, the being said, moving closer, and something like fascination colored the telepathic impression. And that's what we can't comprehend. The central paradox of human consciousness. You fear death existentially, experience it as the ultimate enemy, create entire cultural systems to deny its finality, and yet you live as if your actions have eternal significance. You build cathedrals you'll never see completed, knowing you'll die before the spires are raised. You plant forests knowing you'll never walk through them mature. You create art that will outlast you by centuries. You sacrifice your present for your children's future, for grandchildren not yet born, for generations you'll never meet. The being paused, and Robert sensed it was accessing vast stores of observed data, pulling specific examples from millennia of study. This paradox, terror of mortality coupled with living as if immortal, this is the trait we cannot replicate. We can extend our existence indefinitely, but we can't make existence matter the way you do. You compress eternity into decades and make those decades more significant than our millennia. The being moved to the edge of the deck, looking out at the dark shape of the hills beyond Stanford, at the spread of lights that marked human habitation. human activity, human lives burning bright and brief across the landscape. Let me show you what we've observed, the being said, turning back to face Robert. 3 specific human behaviors that make no logical sense to an immortal consciousness, but define your species. 3 demonstrations of how you transform limitation into significance. You had a colleague, the being continued. Dr. Patricia Morrison. Terminal pancreatic cancer diagnosed 14 months ago. Given 6 months to live. She survived 8. Do you know what she did with those final months? Robert felt tears forming. Patricia. Brilliant mathematician. Friend for 20 years. Gone now for 6 months. He'd attended the memorial service. Listened to colleagues share stories. Watched her daughter break down while reading a letter Patricia had written before she died. She organized all her research, Robert said, his voice thick. 2 decades of work on prime number distribution patterns. Created detailed notes so others could continue. Formatted everything according to journal standards even though she knew she wouldn't be there for publication. She mentored 3 graduate students intensively, meeting with them even when the chemo made her so nauseous she could barely sit upright. She passed on everything she knew, every insight, every technique. She endured horrific treatment side effects to attend her daughter's wedding, smiled through the pain so her daughter's wedding photos wouldn't be tainted by grief. Robert paused, remembering something else. She donated her brain to science for Alzheimer's research even though she didn't have Alzheimer's. She signed the forms a week before she died. Said maybe her tissue could help future studies understand something about neurological diseases. She gave her brain to strangers she'd never meet working on problems she'd never see solved. Precisely, the being said, and Robert detected something like awe in the telepathic impression. With only 180 days remaining, facing constant physical suffering, she invested finite time creating infinite meaning for others. An immortal being would preserve every second for personal comfort, for minimal suffering, for extending existence as long as possible in the most pleasant state achievable. Patricia spent hers in service to futures she wouldn't experience, to questions she wouldn't see answered, to people she wouldn't see graduate or marry or continue her work. The being moved closer, and Robert noticed for the first time that it cast no shadow despite the porch light. Another impossibility to add to the growing list. Why? The being asked. Why does a dying human spend her last days making sure others can continue her work? Why does she care about futures she won't inhabit? Because the contribution mattered more than her comfort, Robert said softly. Because the work was bigger than her. Because legacy means your significance transcends your timeline. And that calculation, that choice, is alien to us. Literally alien. We cannot comprehend valuing abstract meaning over concrete existence. When existence is infinite, comfort always wins. Preservation always wins. Why suffer for others when you can exist pleasantly for yourself across unlimited time? Why invest in futures you won't see when you could invest in futures you will see? But when existence is finite, meaning can win. Contribution can matter more than continuation. This is your first superpower, Dr. Chen. The ability to sacrifice personal timeline for collective significance. The being gestured back toward the house, toward Robert's home observatory visible through the window. The second behavior. Show me your telescope. Tell me why you built it. Robert led the being inside, through the house that still smelled like Elena's lavender soap, through the hallway where her photographs still hung on the walls, to the home observatory he'd built over 15 years. The massive telescope stood silent, pointed at a section of sky he'd been mapping for months. Charts covered the walls. Calculations filled notebooks stacked on every surface. Data logs stretching back years. You know you'll die before understanding most of what you observe, the being said, not a question but a statement. You know your lifetime is insufficient to answer the questions you're asking. Human lifespan is, what, 70 to 80 years if you're fortunate? The universe is 13.8 billion years old. You're studying phenomena that take millions of years to unfold. You observe stars that died before your species evolved, their light only now reaching Earth. You track cosmic events that won't complete in 10,000 human lifetimes. The being moved around the observatory, those long fingers hovering near but not touching Robert's equipment, as if sensing the significance these objects held. Yet you've invested 15 years building this. You wake at 2 a.m. to track celestial events that last minutes. You sacrifice sleep, comfort, relationships, for observations you'll never complete. For data sets your descendants might not even access. You're cataloging a story you'll never see the end of. Why? Robert touched the telescope's smooth metal surface, cool under his palm. The familiar weight of it, the precision of the mechanisms. He'd built this himself. Every bolt, every adjustment. Hundreds of hours of labor for something that might outlast him or might end up recycled scrap in a landfill. No way to know. Because the search matters, Robert said. The questions matter more than the answers. I contribute one piece to a puzzle that others will continue. Maybe my grandson will be the one to finish the star catalog I started. Maybe someone I'll never meet will use my observations to confirm a theory I'll never hear about. The work continues beyond me. That's the point. The work is bigger than my timeline. And there it is again, the being said, and something like wonder colored the impression. You work with desperate urgency knowing you'll never see completion. You pour passion into projects that extend beyond your existence. This creates what you call driven purpose. The pressure of limited time forcing intense focus. We immortals have no such pressure. We can wait. We always wait. And in waiting, we never create anything with urgency. Never generate work that burns with the intensity of deadline pressure. The being paused, accessing something, some memory or data file from its vast experience. Your music, your art, your literature, all born from deadline pressure of mortality. Mozart composed 600 works in 35 years. Desperate, urgent creativity knowing time was short. We immortals compose across centuries. And our work is technically perfect, mathematically flawless, aesthetically precise, and completely lifeless. No passion, no urgency, no soul. Because there's no deadline creating the pressure that transforms technical skill into transcendent expression. The being turned to face Robert fully. This is your second superpower. The ability to create urgently knowing you'll never see completion. To work passionately on projects bigger than your timeline. To pour finite time into infinite questions. We cannot do this. We wait for perfect conditions. We delay for better circumstances. We procrastinate across centuries. You create now because later might never come. They returned to the deck, to the night air that had returned to normal temperature, normal sound. The distant hum of traffic. The rustle of leaves. The ordinary physics of an ordinary October night made extraordinary by this impossible conversation. The being stood very still, and Robert sensed it was accessing something deep, something vulnerable, something it rarely shared. The third behavior, the being said quietly, the one that defines your species most profoundly. When Elena died, you wrote something in your journal 3 weeks after the funeral. May I share what you wrote? Robert stiffened. How could you possibly know what I write privately? How could you access my personal journals? We observe more than you know, Dr. Chen. It's not violation, it's study. We don't judge what we observe. We simply try to understand. You wrote, and these are your exact words, I can replay the pen strokes if needed. I finally understand that I didn't love her despite knowing I'd lose her. I loved her more because I knew I'd lose her. Every moment was precious because moments were numbered. I wasted years not loving her fully enough because I thought I had forever. I took for granted the way she laughed. The way she touched my hand. The specific way she said good morning. I thought we had infinite mornings. And then forever ended at 3:47 p.m. and I realized that the deadline is what makes love real. Scarcity creates value. Limitation creates appreciation. I loved her more in those last 4 weeks when I knew she was dying than in years of assuming she'd always be there. And now she's gone and I finally understand how to love. But she's not here to receive it. Tears were streaming down Robert's face now, hot and unexpected. He hadn't read that entry since he'd written it. Had buried the journal in a drawer because looking at it hurt too much. But hearing his own words reflected back, spoken telepathically by an alien being who'd watched humanity for millennia, something broke open in his chest. Yes, that's what I wrote. That's what I realized. This is the trait we cannot comprehend, the being said, and for the first time, Robert detected something like envy in the telepathic impression. Humans form deeper attachments because of impermanence. Not despite it. Because of it. You love harder because you know you'll lose. You create urgently because time is short. You forgive quickly because life is brief. Your mortality creates emotional intensity we cannot replicate. The being's form seemed to shimmer slightly, as if the bioluminescence was fluctuating with emotion, if such a thing was possible. We can exist beside someone for centuries, the being continued, and never achieve the depth of connection you form in decades, because our connections have no urgency. No deadline. No pressure to love fully now because later is always available. We're casual with relationships because relationships are infinite. You're intense with relationships because relationships are finite. This creates depth we cannot fathom. Let me tell you what immortality costs, Dr. Chen, the being said, moving to sit in the chair across from Robert, mirroring human posture in a way that felt both familiar and uncanny. It costs everything that makes your existence vibrant. First, we lost appreciation. I've seen 4,000 sunrises on your planet. 1.4 million sunrises. I remember perhaps a dozen with any clarity. When sunrises are infinite, they become wallpaper, background, scenery without significance. You saw one this morning. I know because you photographed it and sent it to your daughter with the caption, "Mom would have loved this light." You appreciated that ONE sunrise with intensity I've never felt for 1.4 million sunrises I've witnessed. You noticed the specific quality of the light, the particular shade of gold touching the hills. You felt the absence of Elena in that moment, which paradoxically made the moment more precious. Pain creating appreciation. Loss creating awareness. Second, we lost deep connection. We mate, but we don't marry, not in your sense. We have companions, but not soulmates. We form associations, but not bonds. Why commit deeply when everyone has infinite time to find better matches? Why work through conflict when you can simply wait for easier relationships? Why forgive when you can just move on and connect with others across unlimited time? The being paused, and Robert sensed genuine regret in the silence. You humans commit to imperfect partners and work on relationships because time pressure forces depth, the being continued. Divorce exists. Yes. Betrayal exists. Relationships end. But so does marriage counseling. Second chances. Choosing to stay and work through difficulty rather than seeking easy alternatives. This creates depth. We have infinite time, so we have infinite superficiality. I've had thousands of companions across 4,000 years. I remember perhaps 20 names. None mattered the way Elena mattered to you. Third, we lost meaning-making. We exist, but we don't live. Existence is biological persistence. Continuing across time. Maintaining function. Avoiding termination. Living is creating significance from limited time. It's choosing what matters and investing finite resources in making chosen things meaningful. You live. We merely exist. The being stood again, moving to the edge of the deck where the railing met open air. I want to show you one more thing, the being said. A specific moment. From our perspective and yours simultaneously. The moment Elena died. You need to understand what you possess that we don't. Will you allow this? I can't relive that, Robert said, panic rising, ancient protective mechanisms activating. I can't go through that again. It almost destroyed me the first time. You won't relive it. You'll observe it. Through immortal eyes and through mortal eyes. The contrast is what teaches. The difference between clinical observation and lived experience. This is important, Dr. Chen. This is the core lesson. Before Robert could protest further, his vision shifted. He was standing in the hospital room, watching himself hold Elena's hand as monitors flatlined, as nurses moved with practiced efficiency, as doctors called time of death at 9:23 p.m., as his daughter Sarah sobbed against the wall, as his son David stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to process. But he was seeing it from outside his body, with alien detachment, through immortal perception. From the immortal perspective, it was simple. Clinical. Organic machines ceasing function. Neurons firing final electrical cascade. Synapses going dark. Brain activity declining to zero. Biological termination. Natural cycle. Cellular decay beginning immediately. Sad perhaps, in abstract way, the way you might note a star collapsing or a tree falling. But not catastrophic. 1 unit in a population of 8 billion units. 1 consciousness among trillions that had existed across cosmic time. Natural cycle. Statistically inevitable. The universe would continue. Other beings would exist. The loss of 1 consciousness among billions was not significant to the cosmos. Just another data point. Another termination in the endless cycle of temporary biological machines. But then the perspective shifted. Robert felt himself back in that moment, in his own body, holding her still warm hand, watching the light go out of her eyes. And it was nothing like the clinical view. It was devastation beyond language, beyond thought, beyond anything physics or biology could explain. The weight of 34 years of shared mornings. The accumulated significance of 12,410 days together. The specific texture of her laugh, different from any other laugh in the world. A sound he could pick out in a crowded room, a sound that meant home. The irreplaceable particularness of this consciousness, this woman, this exact combination of memories and mannerisms and ways of saying his name that could never be replicated. The knowledge that every conversation, every touch, every shared joke, every fight, every reconciliation, every ordinary moment of sitting together in comfortable silence was now finite, countable, ended. The library of their relationship permanently closed. No new chapters. No new memories. No more mornings watching her read the newspaper. No more evenings sitting on this deck. No more anything. Ever. Not a person died, but this specific irreplaceable person is gone forever, and I will never, never hear her voice again. Never smell her specific scent. Never feel her particular way of hugging. Never see her smile at me the way only she smiled. She is gone, and with her goes every future we'd imagined, and every conversation we'll never have, and every moment we took for granted thinking we had more time. And the paradox, the impossible paradox that broke him and remade him simultaneously. This devastating loss revealed how precious every moment had been. Love crystallized through loss. He hadn't known how much she meant until she was gone. Hadn't appreciated the ordinary miracles of her existence until existence ended. Scarcity creating value. Limitation creating significance. Ending creating meaning retroactively through all the moments that had led to this ending. Her death made her life sacred. Made their relationship sacred. Made every small ordinary thing they'd shared precious beyond measure. The loss didn't erase the meaning. The loss created the meaning, illuminated the meaning that had been there all along, invisible until it ended. Robert gasped, back on the deck, the vision ending. He was shaking, sobbing, every muscle trembling. But underneath the grief was something else. Recognition. Understanding. The lesson he'd been seeking for 8 months crystallizing in his consciousness. You felt both perspectives, the being asked gently. Yes. And? Robert wiped his face with his sleeve, tried to steady his breathing. The immortal view is objectively true. She was biological matter that stopped functioning. Cells dying. Energy dissipating. Matter returning to component elements. But the human view is real. Subjectively, devastatingly, beautifully real. The meaning I created, the love I felt, the significance of her existence to me, that's real in a way that transcends biological fact. Both are true, but only one matters. The clinical truth is meaningless without the felt truth. The universe doesn't care that she died. But I care. And that care, that love, that meaning, that's the only thing that makes the universe matter at all. Yes, the being said simply, and Robert detected profound agreement in the single syllable. And we can only experience the biological truth. We lack the equipment to feel the existential significance. We observe endings. We don't grieve them. We note terminations. We don't mourn them. That's what we envy. Your ability to create meaning that matters more than facts. To generate significance that transcends observable reality. The being sat down again, settling into the chair with that oddly human gesture. Let me name what we've identified through millennia of study. 3 capacities unique to mortal consciousness. Your species' superpowers that immortal beings cannot replicate. First, compressed intensity. You compress eternity into decades. Every moment heavy with meaning because moments are scarce. We have infinite moments, so they're weightless, transparent, forgettable. You have approximately 30,000 days on average. We've observed humans who live more in 30,000 days than we live in 30,000 centuries. Your days are saturated with significance. Hours are diluted by infinity. Elena knew she was dying for the last 4 weeks. Yes? The being asked. Robert nodded, unable to speak, throat too tight. What did she do with 28 days, knowing they were her last? Robert's voice cracked, but he forced the words out. She wrote letters. 34 of them. 1 for each year we were married. Hid them around the house with instructions for when I should open them. Our anniversary. My birthday. Christmas. First day of spring. Random Tuesdays when she knew I'd need encouragement. She recorded her voice reading children's stories for grandchildren not yet born. 8 hours of recordings. Good Night Moon. Where the Wild Things Are. All the books she'd read to our kids. He paused, remembering. She planted that Japanese maple even though the doctor said she only had weeks. Wanted me to have something growing. Something alive that would continue. She organized all our photographs. Thousands of them. Labeled every single one so I'd remember the stories behind them. Barcelona, 2008. The restaurant where you proposed. Sarah's first bicycle. She crashed into the rose bushes 30 seconds after this photo. Preserving the stories so the images wouldn't become meaningless data. She called everyone she'd ever hurt. Robert continued, his voice breaking. Made amends. Apologized for things from decades ago that the other person had probably forgotten. She forgave everyone who'd hurt her. Let go of grudges. Released resentments. She tied up every loose emotional thread she could find. And in her final week, when the pain was constant and morphine made her confused, she spent whatever lucid moments she had making sure I knew how to pay the bills, where the insurance documents were, which friends to call when I was lonely, what to do with her mother's jewelry. Practical things. Love expressed through ensuring I'd be okay after she was gone. For weeks, the being said, and something like reverence colored the telepathic impression. 28 days. She invested finite time creating infinite meaning. That's compressed intensity. We couldn't do that with 4 centuries. 4 millennia. The deadline creates the urgency. The urgency creates the focus. The focus creates meaning that transcends the timeline. She knew she had weeks and she used them fully. We have eternity and we use it emptily. Second superpower. Loving through loss. Humans are the only species we've studied across hundreds of worlds that knows love will end but chooses to love deeper because it will end. Illogical. Irrational. Completely contrary to protective instinct. Purely, impossibly beautiful. Your brain, the being continued, evolved a specific capacity to simultaneously hold contradictory truths without resolving them. This person will die and this love is eternal. Both true. Both held simultaneously. The contradiction creates tension. The tension creates depth. You don't resolve the paradox. You live inside it. This creates profound emotional intensity unknown to immortal consciousness. We've observed this phenomenon across all human relationships. Parents loving children they know they'll lose. Friends bonding deeply despite certain separation. Lovers committing to partners despite guaranteed ending. This makes no logical sense. Why attach deeply to temporary things? Why invest emotionally in relationships with expiration dates? Why choose vulnerability when loss is inevitable? And yet humans do this instinctively. You love harder because you know you'll lose. The limitation intensifies the connection. This is unique to mortal consciousness. Third superpower, legacy instinct. You sacrifice personal resources for collective futures. You die so your children live. You plant trees for strangers. You build civilizations for generations you'll never meet. You invest in problems you'll never see solved. You create knowledge you'll never use. This is economically irrational but existentially profound. Mortality teaches you that significance transcends personal timeline. That mattering doesn't require witnessing. That contribution is meaningful even when you don't experience the benefits. Patricia donated her brain to research that might help people born after she died. Elena recorded stories for grandchildren who didn't yet exist. You catalog stars for scientists not yet born. This is legacy consciousness, unique to beings who know they'll end. Robert sat in silence, processing. The pieces fitting together. The pattern emerging from what had felt like random suffering. Then he asked the question that had been building. But what about the fear? The terror of death that causes so much human suffering? The anxiety that paralyzes? The desperate life extension attempts that diminish quality for quantity? The existential dread that keeps people awake at night? How does that fit into this picture? The being said, and something like understanding colored the impression. Fear of death versus awareness of death. Completely different. Opposite even, though they appear similar to untrained observation. Fear is, when I die, I cease to exist, therefore I must avoid death at all costs. This creates paralysis. Anxiety. Desperate preservation attempts that diminish life quality. Refusing risks. Avoiding challenge. Clinging to safety. Living smaller to live longer. This is fear-based mortality consciousness. But awareness is, I will die, therefore how I live matters. My time is limited, therefore my choices are significant. Moments are numbered, therefore moments are precious. This creates urgency without desperation. Focus without anxiety. Passion without panic. This is awareness-based mortality consciousness. Your species suffers when trapped in fear. Your species thrives when operating from awareness. Same fact, different relationship. Death is coming. Fear says avoid it. Awareness says let it clarify what matters. How do I move from fear to awareness? Robert asked, and realized this was the question he'd been needing to ask for 8 months. The question underneath all his grief and confusion and lost purpose. You've already begun, the being said. You finish Elena's garden not to preserve her memory, which is fear-based, trying to prevent loss, clinging to past. You finish it to honor how she taught you to see beauty, which is awareness-based, continuing her influence, applying her lessons. She changed how you perceive the world. That change persists. That's not preservation. That's continuation. You read her letters on anniversaries not to pretend she's still alive, which would be fear-based denial. You read them to allow her voice to inform your future, which is awareness-based integration. She invested her last weeks ensuring her presence transcended her timeline. Honor that by living fully, not by freezing in grief. You wear her watch not because you can't accept she's gone, the being continued. You wear it because 3:47 p.m. reminds you that time stops for everyone eventually. The frozen watch is mortality awareness made physical. Daily reminder, time is finite. Use it well. Something shifted in Robert's chest. Not grief disappearing, but his relationship with grief changing. Grief as teacher rather than enemy. Loss as clarifier rather than destroyer. Elena's death wasn't meaningless tragedy. It was her final teaching. The ultimate demonstration of the principle. Love matters because it's temporary. She loved me harder in those last 4 weeks, Robert said quietly, than in years prior. Because she knew. Every moment she had left was precious. Every conversation might be the last. No more taking time for granted. She was present in a way she'd never been before. Fully there. Fully alive. Fully her. And I didn't fully love her back until she was gone, Robert continued, voice breaking. Until I understood the clock had stopped. Until scarcity revealed value I'd been blind to through abundance. I took her for granted when I thought we had forever. Her absence taught me appreciation I should have felt in her presence. Exactly, the being said. Mortality awareness intensifies everything. Elena's awareness of her ending made her final weeks more alive than years of assuming more time. Your awareness of her ended timeline makes your memory of her more vivid than decades of taking her for granted. This is your species' gift. And now you carry it forward. How will you live differently? 3 weeks later, Robert sat in his office at Stanford. The grant proposal that had been paralyzingly difficult was now complete, submitted, accepted. A colleague stopped by, Dr. Sarah Martinez, friend for 15 years. Chen, you seem different. I can't put my finger on it. More present. You're engaging in meetings again. Making jokes. Contributing ideas instead of just sitting silently. You volunteered to mentor that new graduate student. You're planning the department symposium. What changed? Robert considered how to answer. He didn't mention the alien. He didn't mention the impossible conversation or the telepathic visions or the lesson that had cracked him open and remade him. He simply said, I stopped fearing death and started honoring it. Sarah tilted her head, curious. That's profound. How do you honor death? By living as if time matters, Robert said. By finishing what I start because I might not have time to start it again. By loving people fully while I have them because they're temporary and so am I. By creating things that outlast me because significance transcends timeline. Elena dying taught me that deadline pressure isn't the enemy. It's the context for meaning. The frame that makes the picture visible. The research project Robert had been stuck on for months suddenly flowed. Ideas came rapidly. Not because he needed to see completion, but because he worked with urgency knowing time was short, while releasing attachment to personal success or recognition. Legacy thinking. This work matters beyond me. Contribution is meaningful even if I don't see results. 6 weeks later, breakthrough paper published. The university press release quoted Robert. This work stands on the shoulders of everyone who came before and will be built upon by everyone who comes after. That's how human knowledge works. We each contribute our piece knowing we won't see the whole. The incompletion is the point. The passing of the torch is what matters. Science is humanity's ultimate legacy project. His daughter Sarah called one evening, surprised to hear warmth in his voice instead of the hollow politeness that had characterized their calls for months. Dad, you sound different on the phone. Lighter. More present. Are you okay? Robert told her the truth, minus the alien encounter. I realized I was so afraid of losing you like I lost Mom that I was emotionally withdrawing. Protecting myself. Creating distance so it would hurt less if something happened to you. But withdrawing to avoid pain is the same as dying early. I'd rather love you fully for whatever time we have than live half-connected to avoid grief. The grief comes anyway. Might as well have the love too. Silence on the other end. Then Sarah's voice, thick with tears. Dad, I felt that. I felt you pulling away and I didn't know how to reach you. I thought I was losing both parents. Mom to death and you to grief. I'm here now, Robert said. Really here. All the way here. Tell me about your life. Tell me everything. Tell me what you're struggling with. Tell me your hopes. Tell me what scares you. I want to know you before it's too late to know you. They talked for 2 hours. The deepest conversation they'd had in years, maybe ever. Both cried. Both laughed. Shared fears and hopes and regrets and dreams. Connection restored. Deepened. Made sacred by acknowledged fragility. And when they hung up, Robert realized this was what the being had meant. Mortality awareness creating urgency to love fully now, not later, not when it's more convenient, not when you're less tired or less busy, but now while time remains. Robert started the book project Elena had always wanted him to write. Making the cosmos accessible, she'd called it. Translating astrophysics for non-scientists. Making the universe comprehensible to people who'd never taken physics. Before, he'd thought, I'll never finish it. 300 pages. Years of work. What's the point if I die mid-chapter? What's the point if no one reads it? What's the point of starting something I might never complete? Now, I'll write what I can write. If I die mid-sentence, someone else might complete it. If I finish it and no one reads it, the writing itself was the meaning. The work itself is the gift. I want to spend my remaining time creating something useful. That's enough. 2 months after the initial encounter, Robert was on the deck again. Same chair, same time of night. October turning to November, temperature dropping. Leaves falling from the trees Elena had planted over their 34 years in this house. And the being materialized exactly as before, stepping through invisible boundaries between possible and impossible. You've changed, the telepathic voice said without preamble. We've been observing, checking progress. You're demonstrating the trait now, not just experiencing it. Not just surviving mortality but using it. What trait specifically? Living urgently without desperation. Creating meaningfully without attachment to outcome. Loving deeply without fear of loss. You're doing what your species does best when it's functioning optimally. Making finite time infinitely significant. Transforming limitation into power. Robert set down his tea, looked directly at those impossible eyes. Why are you telling me this? What do you want from humanity? Why study us for 4,000 years? What's the purpose? The being was quiet for a long moment, and Robert sensed it was deciding how much to reveal, whether to share something it rarely shared. We don't want anything from you, the being said finally. We want to learn from you. To understand you so we can learn to feel what you feel. To find what we've lost. What have you lost? Everything that makes existence worth existing in, the being said, and for the first time Robert detected genuine sorrow in the telepathic impression. Our species faces extinction of a different kind. Not biological death, but existential emptiness. We exist but we don't live. We continue but we don't matter. We've conquered death but lost the capacity for life. Your species, in your brief fragile existence, has something we've lost across millennia. The ability to make moments matter. To make existence significant. To make living worthwhile. Can I teach you? Robert asked. Can I show you how we do it? Can immortals learn mortality consciousness? I don't know if it's possible, the being admitted. The pressure of finitude might be necessary for the meaning. You can't have light without darkness. You can't have significance without scarcity. Can you appreciate water without knowing thirst? Can you value time without experiencing shortage? I don't know. But I'm willing to try. Robert explained the 3 practices he developed over the past 8 months. The methods that had transformed his relationship with Elena's death from paralyzing grief to clarifying loss. First, mortality meditation. Each morning, I acknowledge, I will die. Possibly today. Possibly in 30 years. Unknown. This makes today significant. Not in a panicked way. Not with anxiety or fear. In a clarifying way. I ask, what matters today? Who matters today? What would I regret not doing if this were my last day? And I do that. I contact that person. I work on that project. I don't wait for perfect conditions. I don't delay for better timing. I do it now. Second, legacy thinking. I ask, if I died tonight, what would I want to have contributed? What difference would I want to have made? What would I want people to remember or continue? Then I work on that today. Not waiting for retirement. Not waiting for more time or better circumstances. Now. The work that would make my life significant if it ended tonight. That's the work I do. Third, grateful living. Elena's death taught me that every person I love is temporary. Every sunset is finite. Every conversation might be the last. This doesn't create fear anymore. It creates appreciation. I notice things now I used to miss. The way light hits the hills in the afternoon. The specific way my daughter says my name. The taste of good coffee. The smell of rain. Small things made precious by their finitude. Ordinary miracles made visible by mortality awareness. The being absorbed this silently, processing, considering, evaluating possibility. I will try, the being said after long silence. I will choose, arbitrarily, a deadline. 1 Earth year from today, I will end this particular form of existence. Create artificial scarcity, self-imposed limitation. And I will observe if urgency emerges, if meaning intensifies, if I can feel what you feel. Will you actually do it? Robert asked. Or is the deadline itself arbitrary and therefore meaningless because you could change it? I don't know, the being said. That uncertainty, whether I'll follow through, perhaps that itself is meaningful. The anxiety of commitment. The weight of chosen limitation. Very human of me. Perhaps the first human thing I've felt in 4,000 years. They sat in silence, two forms of consciousness sharing recognition of the impossible challenge. How to matter when mattering is optional. How to create urgency when time is unlimited. How to generate meaning when significance is choice rather than necessity. And now I need to speak directly to you, the person listening to this story. Because Robert Chen's experience, as extraordinary as it was, points to something you already know but may have forgotten. You are living the most intense form of consciousness in the known universe. Not because you're special. Not because you're chosen. Not because of anything you did or achieved. Simply because you're mortal. Because you exist knowing you'll end. Because you love knowing you'll lose. Because you create knowing you'll die before completion. If you've ever felt paralyzed by awareness that everyone you love will die, if you've felt desperate to make your limited time count but unsure how, if you're caught between life is short and life is meaningless, if you've struggled with existential questions about purpose in a finite existence, you're experiencing the core human paradox. The one aliens can't comprehend. The one that defines us. Your mortality isn't your flaw. It's your feature. The deadline pressure of finite existence creates urgency that births creativity. Scarcity that generates appreciation. Loss that deepens love. Endings that make beginnings matter. The limitation is the power. When you truly acknowledge I will die, three things happen automatically. First, trivial concerns diminish. You ask, will this matter on my deathbed? Will I care about this argument, this slight, this petty grievance when I'm facing my final hours? Most things won't. Mortality awareness clarifies priorities. Second, significant relationships intensify. Limited time with this person creates focus. You stop taking them for granted. Start noticing the specific way they exist. Their particular laugh. Their unique perspective. The irreplaceable particularness of this person who won't be here forever. Third, the present moment crystallizes. This exact moment won't repeat. This specific convergence of circumstances, this particular quality of light, this feeling, this conversation, it's happening once and only once. Mortality awareness makes ordinary moments precious. This isn't morbid. This is clarity. This is being alive to the fact of being alive. Notice what you already do naturally. You plant trees for shade you won't sit under. You create art that outlasts you. You teach children lessons they'll use when you're gone. You fight for futures you won't experience. You create knowledge you'll never use. You build things you won't see completed. You invest in problems you'll never see solved. You're already behaving as if your significance transcends your timeline. Already acting as if contribution matters beyond personal benefit. Already living as if meaning is bigger than your existence. The anxiety comes from believing you're only mortal while simultaneously acting as if you're also immortal. Both are true. The paradox is the point. And here's what changes everything. Death doesn't erase meaning. It crystallizes it. Makes it permanent. Makes it sacred. Elena didn't become meaningless when she died. Every moment Robert shared with her became more meaningful. Finite plus precious equals significant. Temporary plus intentional equals eternal. For those ready to go deeper, to truly understand how mortality serves consciousness, how limitation births meaning, how your temporary existence is the context for eternal significance, the ebook Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence provides detailed practices for transforming death fear into life urgency. Understanding consciousness as eternal presence using temporary form. Methods for creating meaning that transcends personal timeline. Specific meditations for compressed intensity living. Daily practices for mortality awareness without anxiety. Techniques for legacy consciousness activation. This isn't about denying death or pretending immortality. It's about recognizing you are consciousness experiencing what it's like to be finite. And that experience creates the most intense form of meaning possible. Link in the first pinned comment below this video. Some of you need more than information. You need guidance through transforming your relationship with mortality. Moving from death terror to death awareness. From existential paralysis to urgent living. From meaningless existence to compressed intensity. Our spiritual therapists specialize in this deep work. Email address in the description. Individual sessions via video call. We work with where you're stuck specifically. This is transformation work, not quick fixes, for those ready for real inner change. This is for you if you're tired of living in fear of inevitable death. If you sense there's a way to use mortality as fuel, not poison. If you're ready to love harder because time is short. If you want to create urgently without desperation. If you understand that acknowledging you'll die doesn't diminish life but intensifies it. This isn't for you if you want to pretend death isn't real. If you're seeking immortality techniques or life extension strategies. If you want to bypass grief with spiritual concepts. If you're looking for comfortable illusions rather than uncomfortable truths. You have approximately 30,000 days if you're average. Some already gone. Unknown number remaining. Maybe 20,000 left. Maybe 200. Maybe 20. No one knows. You can spend them paralyzed by fear of the ending, numb to avoid feeling the pressure, desperate to extend the timeline while diminishing the quality. Or you can spend them intensely present because moments are scarce, deeply loving because relationships are temporary, urgently creating because time is short. Same days, different relationship to their finitude. Same life, different consciousness of its limitations. The alien couldn't comprehend how humans make finite time infinitely significant. But you do it naturally. You just forgot that you're doing it. Remember now. Notice how you're already living as if your actions matter beyond your timeline. Already creating as if contribution is meaningful independent of personal benefit. Already loving as if connection transcends duration. 6 months after the first encounter, Robert Chen stands in his backyard. The Japanese maple Elena planted is showing full autumn colors, red and gold and orange against the November sky. He's 62 now. Statistically, maybe 20 years remaining. Maybe 20 days. Maybe 20 years and 20 days. Unknown and unknowable. And for the first time since Elena died, he feels grateful. Not grateful she died. Not thankful for the pain. But grateful she lived. Grateful he loved her. Grateful their 34 years together were real and significant and meaningful. Grateful mortality made that love matter in ways immortality never could. The alien had been right. Humanity possesses a trait no immortal species can replicate. The ability to make temporary existence eternally significant. We do it through loving deeply knowing we'll lose. Creating urgently knowing we'll die. Building for futures we won't see. Choosing meaning when meaning is optional. Living as if we're immortal while knowing we're not. Compressing eternity into decades and making those decades more vivid than millennia. This paradox, terror of death coupled with living as if life is eternal, this is what makes us human. This is our superpower. This is what alien beings study for millennia and still can't comprehend. Robert no longer fears death. He acknowledges it. Each morning, same practice, I will die. Time unknown. What matters today? Then he does that. Works urgently on research that will outlast him. Loves his children intensely knowing time is finite. Appreciates sunrises because sunrises are numbered. Writes Elena's book, not because he'll finish it, but because the writing itself is the meaning, the contribution, the legacy. 3 weeks ago, final telepathic transmission from the being, appearing briefly on the deck at midnight. Dr. Chen, I've been attempting your practices. Choosing arbitrary deadlines. Forcing scarcity. Creating artificial urgency. It doesn't work. The knowing that scarcity is chosen rather than real removes the pressure. I cannot replicate your experience. But I've learned something profound. Your mortality isn't just limitation of lifespan. It's architecture of consciousness. Remove mortality. Remove the framework that makes meaning possible. Structure that creates significance. I envy you not because you die, but because dying makes you alive in ways we'll never be. Every ancient wisdom tradition teaches the same thing. Memento mori, remember you will die. Buddhist impermanence meditation. Stoic mortality reflection. Indigenous death awareness practices. Aztec flower and song philosophy. Japanese mono no aware. They all point to the same truth. Acknowledging death doesn't diminish life. It intensifies it. Makes it precious. Makes it real. If these stories help you reconnect with what makes existence meaningful, if they remind you that your limitation is your power, there are 2 ways to support this work continuing to reach those ready to transform. Become a channel member through the button below this video for recurring monthly support. Or leave super thanks, a one-time contribution through the heart icon with $ in the comments. Both allow this work to continue reaching those ready to transform their relationship with mortality, to move from fear to awareness, from paralysis to urgency, from meaningless existence to compressed intensity living. If you're not subscribed, subscribe now. Activate notifications. Every week we share stories that dissolve comfortable illusions and point to truths you've forgotten but never stopped knowing. We don't preach. We don't convert. We share experiences that resonate with those ready to listen, ready to remember, ready to wake up to what they've always known. Leave a comment. Your experience matters. Your voice is part of this. Have you transformed your relationship with mortality? Do you live with urgency or with fear? What would you do differently if you truly acknowledged you'll die? If you knew you had 1 year remaining, how would you spend it? Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Your story might be the catalyst for someone else's transformation. The alien asked the question humans have been asking forever, the question every philosopher and mystic and ordinary person has grappled with. How do you live beautifully while knowing you'll die? And Robert discovered the answer wasn't complex or hidden or esoteric. Because we know we'll die. Not despite it. Not in spite of it. Because of it. The limitation creates the meaning. The ending makes the journey matter. The deadline gives the work urgency. Mortality creates the deadline pressure that makes choices significant. Finitude creates the scarcity that makes moments precious. Loss creates the depth that makes love profound. Ending makes beginning matter. Remove mortality, you remove meaning. Embrace mortality, you unlock intensity. Accept limitation, you access power. You are immortal consciousness using mortal form. The consciousness never dies. Never was born. Never will end. But the form provides the deadline. The limitation. The scarcity. And the deadline creates the meaning. The scarcity generates the urgency. The limitation births the significance. The meaning transcends the deadline even as it requires the deadline to exist. You are eternal experiencing what it's like to be finite. Infinite consciousness in temporary container. And that experience, that compressed intensity, that urgent awareness, is the most alive consciousness can be. The most vivid. The most real. The most significant. You've always known your time is limited. You've always known what you do matters. You've always known love is worth the grief, creation worth the effort, contribution meaningful despite incompletion. You just forgot that knowing these things makes you the most intensely alive consciousness in the known universe. The most precious form of awareness. The most valuable expression of existence. Remember now. Live accordingly. Use your limitation as power. Transform your deadline into urgency. Make your mortality sacred by living as if every moment matters because moments are numbered. The alien couldn't comprehend the one human trait that defines us. The paradox we embody without effort. We die, and knowing we die, we love anyway. We die, and knowing we die, we create anyway. We die, and knowing we die, we matter anyway. We choose significance despite impermanence. We generate meaning despite limitation. We create legacy despite mortality. This isn't courage. This isn't delusion. This isn't denial. This is consciousness choosing significance over safety. Experience over preservation. Meaning over duration. This is humanity at our best. This is what makes us matter in a universe of immortal observers. And across the cosmos, immortal beings watch in wonder, unable to understand, unable to replicate, unable to feel what you feel every time you love someone you'll lose, every time you build something that will outlast you, every time you make a finite moment infinitely meaningful through choice and attention and deliberate awareness. You possess the trait they envy most. The ability to compress eternity into a lifetime. To make 30,000 days more significant than 30,000 centuries. To transform temporary into eternal through meaning-making. To use limitation as launchpad rather than ceiling. Use it well. Your time is short. That's not the tragedy. That's what makes it sacred. That's what makes it precious. That's what makes it yours to fill with significance. Remember, you are not here by chance. Something in this story was meant for you, specifically for you, in this exact moment of your journey. Perhaps the confirmation you were looking for. Perhaps the permission you needed. Perhaps the calling you finally heard. Or perhaps just the seed planted today that will germinate tomorrow and bloom next year and bear fruit you can't yet imagine. What matters is that you made it this far. Through 10,000 plus words, through difficult truths, through uncomfortable awareness. And that means something. In a universe of infinite possibilities, in a timeline where you could have been anywhere doing anything, you're here. Now, reading these words, considering these ideas, feeling this recognition. That moment won't repeat. This exact configuration of circumstances, this specific point in your journey, this particular convergence of readiness and message, it's happening once. This is your moment. The one that might change everything. The one you'll remember later as the turning point. What will you do with it?